When I started looking into 19th century bridges, I thought the story would be straightforward. Industrial growth, steam power, manual labour and standard engineering. That's how textbooks usually present these structures, built quickly, cheaply to support expanding cities. But the more I dug into the archives, the faster that simple explanation crumbled. Bridges aren't defined by what's above the water, but by what vanishes beneath it, the foundation. In engineering, foundations are typically the most documented part of any project. They involve excavation, dewatering, cofferdams, pumping, pile driving and soil stabilisation. Every stage is risky, costly and generates paperwork. So when I reviewed municipal construction records from the 1800s, I expected thousands of pages detailing this process. Instead, I found a void. Invoices for iron existed, worker payrolls were complete and stone deliveries were meticulously recorded. But once construction reached the riverbed, the documentation ceased. Across various cities, countries and decades, the same phrase consistently appeared. Existing foundation. No date, no origin, no technical description, just existing. It was as if the most challenging part of the build had already been finished and no one questioned it. Then I examined early engineering journals. A publication from 1890 described one bridge as a prime example of effectively reusing existing abutments. The sentence was never elaborated upon. Reusing what? Built by whom and when? The journal simply moved on. So I turned to photographs because written records can be incomplete. Photos are harder to manipulate. During dry spells and low water seasons, bridge foundations become visible, and what these images reveal is consistent. No stacked brickwork, no layered rubble, no patchwork repairs. Instead, there were massive single blocks of stone, smooth surfaces, sharp edges, identical bevels and geometric proportions repeated across different regions. Some of these foundations looked machined, not roughly shaped or irregular but precise. Many shared the same 45-degree chamfers, the same stepped cutwaters and the same seamless transition into the riverbed. This is significant because 19th century foundations were usually constructed in visible layers, section by section. These structures lacked such joints. Then geology complicated things further. Many of these bridges sit on soft alluvial soil, sediment that shifts, sinks and erodes. Modern engineers avoid such sites without deep piles, yet inspection reports show minimal settling. After floods, ice and a century of heavy traffic, a 20th century soil study noted, piers appear to bear directly on riverbed material, no piling detected. The authors offered no explanation for this, merely recording their observation. Divers hired in the 1920s reported that the stone continued below the silt level to an unknown depth. No base, no visible footing, no measurable bottom. Again, no investigation followed. Next, I examined renovation records. When bridges were modernised in the 20th century, the pattern was repeated. Superstructures were demolished, decks replaced and roadways widened. But the foundations were preserved, carefully avoided and never disturbed. Permit documents often stipulated demolition limited to above-water structure, substructure to remain intact. Why protect something no one claimed to build? Why preserve something no one could explain? Abandoned engineering proposals offered more clues. In one discarded design, the new bridge was planned only above the waterline. The foundation was labelled existing stone base, surveyed only, not designed, not specified, already there. Cross-sections from these plans showed hollow interiors, internal chambers, radial partitions and sealed access points. Notes in the margins read, inner cavity but purpose unknown, access sealed. Official descriptions called these piers solid masonry, but the drawings indicated otherwise. And when drought-exposed submerged sections, physical evidence confirmed it. Channels cut into stone, flush-mounted iron plates, sealed openings, features unnecessary for simple load-bearing but carefully integrated. These same features appear in bridges along ancient Silk Road routes in Central Asia and Eastern Europe, regions once marked as Tataria on old maps. French and Russian engineering reports from the 1860s described ancient masonry of unknown origin, supporting modern spans, foundations older than surrounding roads, construction dates uncertain. Different empires, different languages, same admission. They were building on something older. When I mapped these bridges, another pattern emerged. They were evenly spaced at regular intervals, aligning with former canals, trade routes and transportation corridors that predated modern cities. Networks partially erased but still physically present. Across 4 continents, the same signature appeared. Monolithic piers, beveled bases, sealed openings, no foundation records, extreme stability and unknown depth. This leads to the central problem. Either 19th century engineers developed a revolutionary foundation technology, used it worldwide, never documented it and then forgot it, or they inherited it. And if they inherited it, then modern civilization rests on infrastructure it did not create. Systems whose builders are absent from the record, methods no longer taught and structures no longer understood. This isn't speculation, this is what the documents show. The paperwork assumes the foundations existed, the photographs show they are anomalous, the geology says they shouldn't survive, the inspections confirm they do, and no official explanation connects these facts, which raises the question that began this inquiry. If the foundations of our bridges were already there, who built them? And why was their history erased? Once the foundation anomalies became too significant to ignore, I changed my focus. Stable stone alone doesn't explain what's surfaced next. Access. If these structures were ordinary, engineers would have documented every internal space. Inspection chambers, drainage corridors, maintenance shafts. Modern bridges have them, and 19th century bridges were supposed to as well. But when I examined maintenance records, a different pattern emerged. Repeated references to spaces that no longer exist. Lower passage closed, substructure access removed, internal stair sealed. These phrases appear in logs from the 1890s through the 1930s. No explanation, no diagrams, no justification, just closure. In several cities, early bridge plans included stairways descending into the piers, narrow spiral steps and service corridors, inspection tunnels. They are visible on original blueprints and appear in early photographs, then suddenly they vanish. Later plans omit them. Renovation records describe them as redundant. Walls were filled, entrances bricked, doors removed. One municipal memo from 1932 states, "Lower levels now inaccessible as instructed." It doesn't specify who issued the instruction or why. It simply records compliance. When I compared this across regions, the timing was consistent. Late 19th century, access remains open. Early 20th century, access disappears. Same decade, same administrative language, same outcome. Then I examined interior inspection chambers that still exist. In a handful of bridges, sealed rooms remain behind locked panels, rarely shown to the public. They are labelled as utility spaces, but where photographs exist, they show something unexpected. Curved walls, arched recesses and stonework far older in style than the surrounding infrastructure. Surfaces are coated in whitewash, painted over, smoothed as if something was intentionally hidden. In multiple cases, outlines of blocked doorways are still visible beneath plaster. The curve of an arch, the trace of hinges, the outline of a former passage. Evidence of a space that once led somewhere but no longer does. Engineering manuals from the era offer no reason for this. Sealing access reduces maintenance efficiency, makes inspections harder and increases risk. There is no technical benefit, meaning the motivation wasn't engineering, it was administrative. I found several examples where workers discovered interior chambers during repairs. Reports mention void uncovered beneath roadway, unmapped cavity, subsurface room encountered. In nearly every case the response is identical: filled, sealed, abandoned. No investigation, no publication, no follow-up. One 1912 report notes, chambers of unknown purpose located, filled with concrete. That's the entire entry. No curiosity, no inquiry. Then there are the drainage systems. Official records describe these bridges as having simple runoff channels, yet physical inspection reveals something else. Internal water pathways, hidden conduits and stone-cut channels that lead into the structure, not away from it. Some terminate in sealed chambers, others end at iron plates embedded in masonry, plates bolted in place flush with the surface, installed during original construction. These are not repairs, they are part of the design, yet no engineering manual from the period explains their purpose. 19th century bridge foundations did not require internal hydraulic networks, but these have them. Then there is the matter of depth. Divers and surveyors repeatedly reported that the stone continues below measurable limits. In several rivers, sonar scans show dense material extending far below sediment layers, deeper than documented foundations, deeper than expected load paths, deeper than the visible structure requires. Yet no excavation records exist, no piling logs, no drilling reports, nothing. The stone simply appears. When I compared these findings to archival material from Central Asia and Eastern Europe, the parallels intensified. Russian surveys from the 1860s describe ancient substructures beneath modern crossings. French engineers in Central Asia documented subterranean masonry predating current roads. Ottoman records reference old riverworks by unknown builders. Different administrations, same observation. Structures already in place, unknown origin, avoided rather than studied. Then there is the question of why. Why seal spaces instead of exploring them? Why abandon internal chambers instead of mapping them? Why preserve foundations while erasing access? Because these actions are consistent with one behaviour: containment. Not destruction, not preservation, but containment. Leave the structure intact, remove human interaction, limit knowledge, stabilise it, cover it, move on. That is precisely what happens when institutions encounter infrastructure they do not comprehend. They don't investigate deeply, they neutralise risk, they restrict access, they normalise ignorance. By the 1930s, most of these lower levels were inaccessible. By the 1950s, many were forgotten. By the time modern engineers inherited these bridges, the anomalies were invisible. Only the stone remained, which leads to the next layer of the investigation. because sealing access didn't eliminate the pattern, it only concealed it. And once the underground spaces were removed from view, something else became easier: rewriting the timeline. By the time the lower levels were sealed, something else had already begun. The records were subtly changing, not suddenly but quietly. A date adjusted, a phrase rewritten, a source removed. Individually, these edits seemed harmless. Together, they rewrote the timeline. When I compared early maps with later additions, the pattern was clear. Bridges shown without construction notes in the 1820s suddenly acquired official dates in the 1870s. Existing crossing became newly built. Old masonry became Victorian foundation. Uncertainty disappeared, certainty replaced it. Engineering journals from the mid-19th century spoke of repairs and improvements. By the early 20th century, the same structures were called new construction. The language shifted and so did the meaning. Municipal records revealed another issue. Maintenance appeared before construction. Repairs in the 1840s, reinforcement in the 1850s, but building dates in the 1880s. The order was reversed. Photographs confirm it. Early images show complete bridges, no scaffolding, no partial stages. They are already there. Later photos show work only on decks and railings, never on foundations. That layer remained untouched. Then there are the missing files. Major projects require surveys and reports, yet many archives begin after the bridge already exists. The first documents describe upgrades, not origins. Early atlases tell the same story. They show crossings where none should exist. Later maps keep the bridge but remove the explanation. By the early 20th century, every structure needed a date, so gaps were filled. Unknown origins received assigned years. Missing builders gained names. Unexplained foundations were ignored. This wasn't a conspiracy, it was administration. Messy history creates problems. Clean records prevent them. So uncertainty was removed. Once a date appeared, it spread. Textbooks copied it, guides repeated it, academics cited it. Within decades, it became fact. Older terms vanished. Ancient roots, former works replaced by neutral labels. History was compressed. Layers were flattened, inheritance became invention. And once that happened, the anomalies no longer stood out. They were absorbed. Which leads to the final stage. Because after the records were cleaned, after the dates were fixed, after the questions were removed, the structures themselves began to disappear. Not by accident, but by design. Once the records were stabilised, the next phase began: removal. Not sudden, not dramatic, but administrative. Bridges were labelled outdated, unsafe, obsolete. Reports cited modern standards, traffic demands, structural fatigue. Public language was neutral, technical, unemotional, but the pattern was consistent. Older bridges were rarely repaired, they were replaced. Stone removed, arches dismantled, piers buried, foundations covered. In many cities, demolition followed documentation. First came surveys, then photographs, then removal, as if the structures had to be recorded before vanishing. Renovation became the preferred term. But renovation often meant erasure. Decorative elements stripped, curvature flattened, stone replaced with concrete, ornament removed. Function was preserved, meaning erased. Engineering reports revealed the strategy: keep the base, remove the character, build upward, cover downward. Old foundations remained, but their visible identity vanished. In some cases, bridges weren't destroyed, they were submerged. Riverbanks raised, channels rerouted, embankments widened. The structure remained underground, out of sight, out of memory. Infrastructure plans from the early 20th century show this clearly. Old crossings are marked, then crossed out, then replaced, often at the same location, as if relocation was never considered, only overwriting. World wars accelerated the process. Bomb damage justified clearance. Reconstruction justified redesign. Heritage was sacrificed for efficiency. Few questioned it. Afterwards, standardized materials took over: steel, concrete, prefabrication. Bridges became interchangeable. Local identity disappeared, and so did historical depth. Photographic comparison makes this undeniable. Pre-1900 images show layered stonework, complex geometry, multiple levels. Post-1950 images show flat spans, straight lines, minimal detail. Simpler, cheaper, weaker. Maintenance records confirm it. Older structures required little intervention, new ones required constant repair. Yet the old ones were removed anyway because durability wasn't the priority. Control was, standardization was, predictability was. Anything inherited, anything anomalous, anything unexplained was a liability. So it was erased or buried or disguised. By the late 20th century, most of the original network was gone. Only fragments remained, hidden in riverbanks, locked behind concrete and trapped beneath modern decks. And without context, they became invisible. Tourists see landmarks, engineers see load ratings, cities see assets. No one sees inheritance. Which brings us to the final conclusion. These bridges were not simply replaced, they were overwritten. Physically, administratively, historically. First, the records were cleaned, then the structures were simplified, then the originals were removed. Not all at once, but systematically. And what remains today is not the original network. It is a reduced version built on foundations no longer acknowledged, serving purposes no longer remembered. The stone is still there, the evidence remains, but only for those willing to look beneath the surface. Because history did not destroy these bridges,